So it's the zombie apocalypse. So everything has changed forever. Well, even so, you still gotta earn a living. So what if you, in the middle of an apocalypse, were the only delivery worker in your entire area? And believe me, the zombies aren't the only ones hungry.
Feel the chill in the air. Listen to the leaves rustle as they die and fall to the ground. It is Halloween. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Join me for a tale of Halloween. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my spookies. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for a little spooky in your weekly. I'm your host, but not narrator tonight, Enrique Couto, and the story we have for you all tonight, it's by my good buddy and monthly spooky co-host, Michelle Antisocial. At the end of every month, she and I sit down and talk about weird news stories and odd topics to kind of round out the month here at Weekly Spooky. Well, Michelle has done me an incredible favor. Michelle has not only written a story for all of us to enjoy, but she narrated it for us too so that I could take a much-needed break and prepare for tomorrow's show, which is an entire audiobook, an entire free audiobook from the Babysitter Massacre collection. Babysitter Massacre Daddy's Little Killer will be here for you to listen to tomorrow, completely free. So if you love slasher films, well, you won't want to miss it. But now we have this story from Michelle that I really enjoyed, and I know you will too. It's got a whole lot of scares and a whole lot of laughs. It's my kind of story. But before we get to that, I want to say thank you so much for listening. I know so many of you who are tuning in are brand new to the show, and I hope I've earned your subscription by the end on your favorite podcasting app. And hey, while you're at that podcasting app like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, why not leave us a 5-star rating and make sure other spookies know they're in the right place? I really do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And if you want to join us over on Facebook, just punch in Weekly Spooky's Tomb of Terror into the search box and you can join me and our fellow authors as we share fun stories and memes and all things spooky. And remember, there'll be a brand new episode every single day this October, so you do not want to miss what we have in store for you, as Weekly Spooky is daily. But now, it's time for the apocalypse after these quick words from our sponsors.
Send Beer by Michelle Antisocial. You know how sometimes a squirrel will just grab an unripened tomato right off the plant, take one bite, and then throw the rest right on the ground to rot? That's exactly the way I found Lucy. On the sidewalk, surrounded by flies, a long line of ants marching into the missing chunk of flesh and feathers on the left side of her neck. I touched my own neck in empathy. The area is still slightly tender after all this time. Shaking the ants away, I picked up her rigid body. I removed the note that was still somehow tied to her leg. Send beer. Fuck. There was no beer. Those frat boys at 17th and Oak must have been well aware of that fact, and yet they sent Lucy to her death for what? A joke? Or did they really think I could find them alcohol? Did they think I hadn't looked? I mean, maybe if I broke into every empty house in the area, I could find some. No. If they wanted it so badly, they could do that themselves. This, of course, meant that even though I didn't have anything to deliver, I still had to stop over there and politely ask them to please stop asking for alcoholic beverages. I wrapped Lucy in the remnants of a plastic bag that I'd been keeping for this kind of occasion and carefully placed her into the empty side pocket of my backpack. I was as excited at the prospect of barbecued pigeon for dinner as I was nauseous over the idea of chewing on her potentially bacteria-ridden, rotting flesh. And I still had a long evening of oppressive early autumn heat and humidity before I could get home to cook. I cursed the useless gas generator as I loaded my supplies and homing pigeons into the rickety cart attached to the back of my bicycle to get ready for the ride around town. Friday means that instead of just working a 9 to 5 delivering floral arrangements to mostly funeral homes, I pull a grocery delivery shift afterwards, which is exactly what it sounds like. Everyone has a week to send their birds back with a list of everything they need, and then I go get those things and deliver it to them as well as return the pigeon for next time. Given the situation, it's not a job I would choose if I actually had the choice. But for reasons I won't and frankly do not want to get into, I have qualities that make me significantly more capable of being around the no longer people than your average weirdo does. So it's either me getting food to people or it just doesn't happen. At least not without terrible, terrible consequences for the delivery person. And it seems wrong to make others suffer like that. So I suffer instead, just markedly less so. Or at least that's what I'd tell my parents to make them feel better about my recklessness if I thought they actually cared about me. Not that they can care anymore. They're dead after all. But enough about my dead family. I was headed to the supermarket. The supermarket used to be my least favorite part of the entire experience. Until recently, it was still open to the public and more or less a functional business. Some guy, maybe the guy who owned it, was always there and would make small talk with me when I shopped. Or at least he would attempt to. He was nice enough and remembered my name from the one time I'd told him, though I think I was his only customer most days. I even caught him making attempts to use gender-neutral pronouns when referring to me. All of that was a problem, because I couldn't, for the life of me, remember his name. I wanted so badly to respond to his cheery, "Hiya, Felix," with something other than, "Hey." But I couldn't, and it killed me more than any zombie ever could. You know, metaphorically speaking, at least. I tried everything I could to figure it out. Could I have just asked him? Fuck no. So you can imagine the position I was in. Anyway, all problems are temporary, right? At least this one was, because one day the store was just closed. Maybe he just got tired of seeing me and only me, the kid who didn't remember his name, and decided it was finally time to end this charade. It would make me so happy to hear that that was the reason, and it's not that he died, but you know how that goes. The supermarket was only a few blocks from the flower shop. The building was partially boarded and in the beginning stages of decay. Tall weeds sprung up from once minuscule sidewalk cracks, and the dirty green striped awning that hung over the entrance had partially detached from its brackets. It swayed slightly in the sweltering breeze. I ducked through the shattered glass door, ready to get to work. Despite its exterior, the market was quite pleasant now. Its cool, musty decor and shelves of decaying food were almost homey to me. At that point, there wasn't much desirable product left, but I always did my best to accommodate. I do like a good challenge. No boxed spaghetti left? Replace that sucker with a can of SpaghettiOs. You want ingredients to make chicken parmesan? Well, we don't have chicken anymore, but let me introduce you to these here SpaghettiOs. Green beans? SpaghettiOs got you covered, fam. Looking for those individually wrapped brownies to give your kids so they stop crying about the zombies? Canned ravioli? They're sort of the same shape, and just put sprinkles on them and you're all set. The whole shopping experience took about an hour, and then I headed out on my mission to deliver the goods. Unfortunately, Lucy's demise left the frat bros without a pigeon, which meant that I had to do something I'd been putting off. A welfare check. It had been 2 weeks since I'd gotten an order from one of my oldest customers, the Patels, a family of 3 on the east side. They had never taken even a week off from ordering before, and while I was hoping that they just decided to switch to one of my competitors and forgotten to return my bird, I was also aware that I didn't have any. I was the only person on this side of the city stupid enough to do this, which meant something happened to my pigeon, or worse. The Patels lived at the very edge of the suburbs. It was a little bit out of the way where the roads were less predictable with cars and dead things, so I waited until close to the end of my route when I was carrying less food and pigeons to swing by. Also, I was really dreading it. While there was still plenty of time before sunset, you'd never have known due to the densely wooded streets that encompassed the area. All was silent on my approach besides the crickets. Nothing lives here anymore. The phrase welled up from somewhere deep within my subconscious and gave me pause. I gulped, gripping my handlebars a little harder than necessary as I turned down the Patel's driveway. Their house was one of those mid-century types, one-story, flat roof, no basement, many, many windows, exactly the kind of place you'd pray you didn't have to ride out the apocalypse in. They'd done their best to board up most of the windows, but I always wondered why, with the majority of the city available, they'd chosen to stay in that particular place. It's the kind of ridiculous sentimentality that'll get you killed, I scoffed, and hopped off my bike at the curve of the driveway by the front door. The place looked secure, but as my breathing calmed, I noticed an unusual sound intermixed with the drone of crickets. Tap, tap, tap. The unmistakable sound of a fingernail hitting plexiglass radiated out from the building in an unpredictable, somewhat frantic pattern. Were they trapped inside and trying to get my attention, I wondered? Maybe someone was just practicing their drumming technique against the window. I sighed. If so, they had no sense of rhythm. Now, in context, that makes next to zero sense. But since I'd conjured the possibility into existence, I took a moment to wonder what I'd do if Mr. Patel answered the door and asked what I thought. I'd say it sounded delightful. They were doing their best after all, and a little encouragement can go a long way. Sweating more over the possibility of an awkward conversation than someone needing my help escaping, I knocked timidly on the door. Nothing. I tried a bit harder. Mrs. Patel? It's Felix, I fumbled. You know, the grocery person you, sometimes get grocery deliveries from? No response, just consistent light tapping. Are you okay in there? I gingerly tested the doorknob. It was locked. Mr. Patel, do you still have my pigeon? Maybe they were just in the bathroom or something. Yeah, all three of them in the bathroom, just hanging out. I'd hate to think that I rushed their bathroom family time. So I just silently stood there for a full 5 minutes, trying to be polite and panicking about what to do next. All the while, the tapping persisted. I sighed. It was time to get serious and investigate the source. I carefully and quietly began to walk the perimeter of the sprawling residence, weirdly afraid that someone would see me and think I was trying to break in. Like there were people. As I made my way around the left side of the home, I was able to pinpoint its general location to a window directly behind a row of overgrown barberry bushes, which, as you probably don't know, are my number one least favorite type of shrub. And yes, I do have a list. I pushed myself between the vegetation and siding, trying to avoid the plant's thorns and failing miserably. The area behind the bush wasn't completely boarded, but it was too dark for me to see inside. I pressed my hand against the glass. It reverberated in tandem with the taps. I was in the right place. I fought with the thorns and my pants pocket to retrieve my flashlight, and then, shaking, lifted it towards the window and slid the switch to the on position. A tiny face was staring back at me. "Basura!" I gasped. My pigeon cocked her head, possibly equally as surprised to see my face. Her beak and feathers were soaked in blood. Smeared specks of blood clung to the window where she'd been pecking. Adrenaline shot through my small frame, and I tore out of the bushes and back to the front door. And then I kicked that fucker until the jamb snapped and the door burst open and slammed deafeningly against the wall. "Sorry," I called out sheepishly. But it was silent. Streaks of daylight from the gaps between the boarded windows crisscrossed the lime green carpet, illuminating the interior just enough for me to see without a flashlight once my eyes adjusted. From the foyer where I stood, everything looked pristine. I was beginning to consider the possibility that they'd simply packed up and moved to a safer, less windowy house, or headed west in a desperate attempt to cross state lines, just leaving my pigeon intentionally or unintentionally. Convinced I was, at least momentarily alone, I crossed the living room and started down the hallway in the direction of the window that had my bleeding bird in it. 4 doorways loomed ahead of me. The first two were empty bedrooms. Then the third was a bathroom with no family time happening in it. However, the last door, unlike the others, was shut and locked. I thought maybe I could hear a faint rustling inside. "Basura?" I called out. I was so relieved to hear her coo from within the room that I jimmied the door open and took several steps into the space without much thought. My only goal was to grab her and get the hell home. There was no way I trusted the frat bros with an injured pigeon, or really anything at this point. They'd have to wait. Basura flew right over to me and perched on my hand. "Good girl," I assured her quietly as I examined her body, trying to locate a cut or a wound of any kind. But while she was caked in what was most certainly blood, she wasn't actually bleeding. Not anywhere. My heart sank. "What have you been eating, sweetheart?" Basura bobbed her head at me quizzically as if to say, "No hablo inglés. En español, por favor?" "You know I don't speak Spanish," I said aloud. "Let's just get out of here, okay?" As I turned around to leave the bedroom, I caught something big and dark in my peripheral vision. I froze. There, hanging from one of those decorative exposed ceiling beams, was a very dead Mrs. Patel. And to make matters more uncomfortable, she was just covered in peck marks. I unconsciously dropped my hand, prompting Basura to fly off of it and over to Mrs. Patel's shoulder and begin munching on her face. "Basura, get down from there right this instant! You're embarrassing me!" I said in an unnecessarily hushed tone. My bird continued to not understand English and attempted to rip some of the skin off of Mrs. Patel's cheek. "Basura, Something stirred further off in the darkness. "Hello?" I switched on my flashlight and began to search the far side of the bedroom, careful to aim around Mrs. Patel to spare my psyche any further gory details. Something was hunched down behind one of the chairs in the small sitting area near the ensuite bathroom.
You're not safe yet. Weekly Spooky. We'll be right back.
From my position, all I could see was long, dark hair. "Hey, are you a zombie, or..." The thing continued to sit quietly, so I made the regrettable decision to find out for myself and slowly close the distance between us. "If you're not dead, and you could respond to me, it'd help a lot," I coaxed, realizing in my panic to save my injured pigeon, I'd left my weapon outside. This was bad. The thing that I could, by that point, more accurately categorize as a little girl, probably the Patel's daughter, was still not moving. Her head was down, body slumped, and I could make out several partially scabbed, partially infected human bite marks around her ankles. So, yeah, this was probably a zombie, but I needed to confirm before I made any decisions about how to dispose of it. Prepared to pull away in case of an attack, I carefully pushed back her hair. As I did, her body tensed. But I couldn't think of another word to replace it with. Not that she was listening. Not really. After a moment of awareness, her eyes had fixed on something very far away. If this was literally any other place or time in modern history, I'd have called 911. The ambulance and the police would have been dispatched, and I would have sat outside with her until they came. They'd wrap us in blankets, and I'd give a statement to the cops. Then they'd take her to the hospital and treat her injuries, and CPS would handle things from there. But none of those things existed anymore, so I was going to have to handle it. And I don't mean handle it in a good way. A sudden wave of anger coursed through my body. You don't go about this the same way as when the oxygen mask drops on a plane. You do not take care of yourself before your child, Mrs. Patel. Child first. Always child first in murder-suicides. Don't make me do it. Based on her limited reaction to stimuli, it wasn't too difficult to estimate that the girl, whose name I'd forgotten, was on day 5 or 6 of a grueling 7-day slog between exposure and full infection, which consisted of increasing confusion, loss of awareness, antisocial behavior, and, well, who really knows what else? Until at the end you're just some violent human husk. There was, of course, a 0.5% chance that she'd just die instead, but that death always looked incredibly painful, so I can't say it would be much of an upgrade. I sat there for a long time, trying to convince myself of the importance of committing the act that her mother would rather end her life than see come to pass. You have to, you know, I told myself. Straightening my back, I reached out towards her and wrapped my hands around her throat. Without a gun, no bullets left, BT dubs, it was the nicest way I could think of. Once her body was dead, I'd have to use more violence to make sure she didn't come back. I'd made the decision. All I had to do was squeeze. As my grip increased, her eyes suddenly locked with mine. They were filled with fear. A lot of fear, like way too much fear. I'd been wrong about the timeline. Her fingernails sunk into my forearms, desperately trying to pull me off as I choked her. The awareness of her reaction completely caught me off guard. Had she even been bitten? I mean, I was almost positive that those were human bite marks on her ankles, but the very real and increasing possibility that what I was really dealing with was just a very traumatized 7-year-old, not a monster, made my extremities go cold. And before I realized what I was doing, I'd grabbed Basura and bolted out of the room. I could hear her coughing and gasping for air as I rushed down the hallway. Fuck this. Fuck all of this. In the kitchen, the Patels had a large stockpile of bottled water. I sat my pigeon in the sink and, as carefully as was possible with my trembling hands, washed the blood from her feathers. There was absolutely no reason I needed to add this one to the long list of things plaguing my conscience. I wasn't even sure I agreed with the premise of mercy killings anyway. Sparkly clean, or at least clean enough. I toweled Basura off in my shirt and headed for the front door. I was going to drop Basura off at the frat and go home, and suddenly a desperate scream crashed through the building and sent me running right back down that same damn hallway. Oh, it was Mr. Patel. I'd been wondering about him, but there he was, now in the bedroom, pinning his already almost strangled daughter to the ground and, eating her small intestines? Large intestines? I don't know, I'm really not that good at anatomy. Well, at least that's what he was doing until my rapid approach distracted him and he lunged at me. I wasn't able to dodge quite as nimbly as I'd liked, and he flat out tackled me, knocking me into the bedside table before I hit the ground. I was trying to keep his teeth away from my everything and simultaneously punch him hard enough to get him off of me, but I'm not that great at close combat. Granted, he was twice my size, but I feel like I should have been able to manage better, all things considered. So I was laying there, using every ounce of my strength to keep from being chewed on, accepting that everything I'd done that day was very stupid, when a dark blur streaked across the room, landed on Mr. Patel's face, and started pecking his eyes. It was Basura! My attacker momentarily distracted, I was able to reach behind me, hoping that there'd be something in the knocked-over table that I could use to end this. I fumbled around until I felt something cold, hard, and substantial, and then I brought it down over his skull. And then I hit him over and over and over again. And then I continued to hit him until I was sure that no part of him would ever be able to move again. I then took a moment to catch my breath and waited patiently for his daughter to stop breathing and, proceeded to do the same thing to her too. Afterwards, I washed my hands really, really well. It was only then that I realized what the object I'd been using to crush my attackers was. A somehow still intact 3/4 full bottle of vodka. The frat was only about a 15-minute bike ride away, so I made it there before 8:30. I don't know why I keep calling it that, by the way. The university had been made inaccessible, as it was on the other side of the now blown-up bridge, and also it hadn't held classes in over a year, so it was a little less like a frat and more like a gang, like a really boring gang. The house was one of those opulent 1920s Johns that had been falling apart for at least a decade before the bad stuff happened, surrounded by a 15-foot tall fence made of an amalgamation of just about every building material that you can think of. A guy dressed in too cool for the apocalypse gear pointed his gun in my direction from a makeshift watchtower as I approached, only to lower it again. I tried and failed to speak so that I could explain myself, but it didn't seem to matter. I know, just go in already. He motioned to the gate with his rifle. Earlier on my route, I'd come up with the most perfect soapboxy speech to shame these guys. I was going to tell them about Lucy and how they were putting me and my birds in unnecessary danger, but I'd give them one more chance because I didn't think they were being malicious. But by the time I stood on that dry-rotted porch staring at Stefan, the only guy whose name I'd actually remembered, I was having trouble keeping any sort of mental narrative running. I was really just trying not to throw up. I don't know how I looked at that point, but I can only assume it was kind of off-putting, because instead of saying hello, Stefan just stared at me. I parted my lips to speak first, but I could only manage a nonsensical squeak. So instead, I lifted the bottle of vodka out of my backpack and shoved it into his chest, then turned to leave. The beer thing. That was really just supposed to be a joke, he said, staring at the bottle. I stopped, turned back, and made a spur-of-the-moment decision. Instead of Basura, I retrieved the plastic bag-wrapped dead Lucy from the pouch I'd stored her in and shoved her into his hands. He fumbled to hold on to both her and the vodka. Thanks? I shrugged and again turned to leave. I could hear the plastic crinkle behind me as he opened the Lucy package. Hey, it was really supposed to be a joke, Stefan called out. I stopped. Good one, I managed to eke out. Good one? Fucking good one? I berated myself as I rode through the mostly empty streets, zigzagging to avoid the occasional zombie. How on earth was that a good one, Felix? And to make matters worse, I'd handed them my food? I was clearly never going to be able to face that gang again. Luckily for me, I was no longer even a little bit hungry, so instead of having barbecued pigeon as planned, I went to sleep for dinner, feeling like I'd played the ultimate prank on myself. Gotta make the joke funny somehow, I guess.
What did you spookies think? I really enjoyed it, and I think you should leave a little comment encouraging Michelle by sending an email to weeklyspooky@gmail.com. Michelle did an incredible job, and of course, on the 30th of this month, on Monday, you'll be able to hear Michelle and I do our special monthly spooky for Mischief Night. And you won't want to miss that. We have so much cool stuff coming up. This Saturday, I'll be doing a new episode of Cutting Deep into Horror with Rachel, and we're going to be talking all about the Halloween comedy horror classic, Murder Party. You will not want to miss that episode as well. I know, we have so much content. Our cup, it truly runneth over. Hey, it's spooky season, so you better believe we take it seriously over here. Because if you're new to listening, just be aware. Every single week, whether it's January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, we're always here to bring you the spooky, and we're going to have a lot of extra special episodes for the Christmas season as well, because some people don't want to admit it, but Christmas itself has a whole lot of spooky backstory to it. And a humongous thank you to our Patreon backers who make this all possible, and especially our Patreon podcast boosters. These are folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names at the end of the show. And they are Johnny Nix, Bobbletopia.com, Megan Hua, Julia Kirsch, Brent McCullough, Steve King, Karen Wement, and Craig Cohen. And if you want to join that list, if you want to join the spookies helping us make sure we bring the scares forever and always, just go to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you make sure the spooky keeps on coming, and every single month you get a brand new, exclusive scary story just for you. And so much more. There is a lot going on over at the Patreon over at weeklyspooky.com. Go over there and check out everything we've got, including over 200 previous episodes. But now I've got to get out of here because I have to get ready for so much more content. But for myself, for my executive producers, Joshua Butler and Rob Fields, my producer, Dan Wilder, and my composer, Ray Mattis, I'll talk at you tomorrow.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.